The old man sat alone on the broken bench outside his small hut. His name was Daniel, a widower who lived far from the rest of the colony. He had once been an engineer, a man with skilled hands and clever ideas. But after his wife passed away, he lost the will to build anything new. His days were quiet, his nights even quieter, only filled with memories of the family he once dreamed of having. One evening, as the red sun dipped low behind the mountains, Daniel noticed something unusual in the distance. A small figure was moving slowly across the barren field, carrying heavy stones in her arms. At first, he thought it was a child, but as he looked closer, he saw the truth. It was not a child, and not even human. It was an alien girl, her skin pale with a faint glow, her eyes large and filled with a silent fire. She walked with determination, placing each stone carefully on top of another, shaping the beginning of a wall. Daniel frowned, confused. He had lived in this colony for years and never saw anyone like her. Aliens sometimes passed through for trade, but they never stayed. Yet here was this girl, alone, building something brick by brick, as if nothing else in the world mattered. He watched her hands, delicate yet strong, her movements steady, her face calm, but her eyes betrayed loneliness. It was the same loneliness that lived inside him. Something about her pulled at his heart. Day after day, Daniel found himself watching her. He told himself it was simple curiosity, but deep down, he knew it was more. She reminded him of himself, stubbornly trying to create meaning in a life that had lost its purpose. The girl never spoke, never looked toward him, but she continued her work. Her pile of stones grew into walls, her small shelter slowly rising against the vast emptiness of the land. One morning, Daniel saw her stumble. The stone she carried slipped from her, tired hands, and rolled across the dust. For a moment, she just stood there, breathing heavily, staring at the unfinished wall. Her shoulders shook, and Daniel thought she might cry, but instead she bent down, lifted the stone again, and kept building. That quiet strength struck Daniel like lightning. He felt ashamed of his own weakness, the way he had let his grief chain him down. The next day, Daniel left a small jug of water near the edge of the field. He did not want to scare her, so he placed it quietly and walked away. Later, when he looked, the jug was gone. The girl never said a word, but when their eyes met briefly across the distance, she gave a short nod. It was not much, but to Daniel, it felt like the start of something. Each day after that, he left small things, bread, tools, cloth, simple gifts that might help her. She accepted without complaint, but also without thanks. Still, Daniel did not mind. He was not helping her for gratitude. He was helping because he could see himself in her struggle. Brick by brick, she was not only building a house, she was building a mirror of his broken heart. One evening, as the wind howled across the plain, Daniel sat again on his bench. He imagined what it would feel like to have someone sit beside him, to share a meal, to laugh, to talk about the future. It had been so long since he allowed himself to dream of family. But watching the alien girl in the distance, stacking stone after stone, he began to dream again. He whispered to himself, maybe she is not only building a house, maybe she is building hope. The thought frightened him, but it also warmed him. He did not know her story. He did not know her pain, but he knew one thing. He would keep watching, and maybe, just maybe, he would find the courage to stand beside her someday. That night, as the stars lit up the endless sky, Daniel closed his eyes with a strange peace in his chest. For the first time in years, he did not feel completely alone. The sound of stones being placed brick by brick echoed in his dreams. And in those dreams, he saw not just a house rising in the distance, he saw the shape of a family waiting to be born. The days turned into weeks, and Daniel's quiet habit of watching the alien girl grew into something more. Every morning, before the sun rose high, he would sit with his cup of bitter tea, his eyes fixed on the distant figure who moved with tireless rhythm. She was always there, lifting, carrying, placing, brick by brick. It was as if the act of building was her only reason to breathe. But there was something else too, something unspoken between them. Daniel began leaving more than water and bread. He left an old hammer, then nails, then pieces of wood he no longer needed. Each time, he would place the items near the half-built walls and walk away before she arrived, and each time the tools would vanish, quietly claimed, quietly used. One evening, Daniel stayed longer than usual, hidden behind a ridge of stone. He watched as she touched the hammer he had left, her long fingers tracing the handle. Her face remained calm, but her eyes softened for a moment, as if she remembered something, or someone. Then, without a word, she struck the stone with careful precision. Daniel smiled to himself, realizing she had accepted not just the gift but perhaps his presence too. Still, she never spoke, never smiled, never called out. To others, it might have felt cold, but Daniel understood. Sometimes silence was heavier than words. Sometimes silence was trust. One night, strange lights flickered on the horizon. Daniel stiffened, his heart uneasy. He knew the colony guards rarely patrolled this far, and traders did not come during nightfall. The lights moved slowly, almost like lanterns in the dark, and then he heard voices, low, sharp, speaking in a language he barely recognized. Aliens, not like her, but of her kind, moving toward the half-built house Daniel Deuce. Walked low, hiding behind broken stone, his heart pounding. He watched as the alien girl froze, her hands clutching the last brick she had lifted. The voices grew louder, filled with anger. One of the aliens shouted at her, their words harsh. Daniel could not understand, but the meaning was clear. They did not want her here. She dropped the stone and stood straight. Though smaller than the others, her posture was defiant. She shook her head slowly, refusing whatever command they had barked at her. The largest alien raised a weapon, its shape jagged and cruel. Daniel's fists clenched, his breath sharp. He had no weapon, no strength to fight, but every fiber in his body screamed at him to act. Yet he stayed hidden, paralyzed between fear and courage. The confrontation lasted only minutes. The alien shouted again, then kicked over part of the wall she had built, sending stones crashing to the ground. She stood still, her face hard as steel, but Daniel could see her trembling. Then, as quickly as they came, the strangers left, their lights vanishing into the night. The girl bent down, picking up the fallen stones, her hands steady, though her shoulders shook. Daniel felt shame bite into him like fire. He had done nothing, only watched. And yet, even after being attacked, she continued her work, brick by brick, wall by wall, as if no enemy could stop her. The next morning, Daniel walked toward the site for the first time. His legs felt heavy, his chest tight, but he forced himself to keep going. When he arrived, the alien girl turned her eyes to him for the longest time yet. No words, only silence. But in that silence, he felt accused. He knelt beside the broken stones and picked one up, placing it carefully on the wall. Her eyes narrowed, then softened. Without speaking, she handed him another brick. For the first time, they worked side by side. The hours passed, and the sound of stones stacking filled the air. Neither of them spoke, but their silence felt alive now, not empty. Each movement was a conversation, each brick a promise. Daniel's muscles ached, but he did not stop. He felt stronger than he had in years, as if his grief had finally found something it could turn into strength. When the sun fell, they stopped together. The walls now stood taller, stronger, no longer a fragile outline, but the skeleton of a true home. The girl finally looked at him directly, her eyes shining faintly in the dusk. She placed her hand on the wall, then on her chest, then nodded at him. It was not speech, but it was clear enough. She was saying, "Thank you." Daniel's throat tightened. For the first time since his wife's death, he felt something new rising in his chest. Not despair, not loneliness, but the fragile spark of hope. And yet, in the distance, he thought he saw those same flickering lights again, watching, waiting, biding their time. The danger was not over, but neither was the bond that was slowly forming between a lonely human and an exiled alien girl. The bond between Daniel and the alien girl grew stronger with each passing day. Though they never spoke, their hands told the story brick by brick, stone by stone. Together they lifted, placed, and shaped the walls that were no longer just hers but theirs. And yet behind her calm face, Daniel sensed a storm, a weight she carried that no wall could shield. One evening, as the two worked, a shadow approached from the colony. It was old Marin, one of the traders who often roamed the outskirts. He stopped at the edge of the field, squinting at the strange pair. His eyes lingered on the alien girl, then narrowed. "I should have known," he muttered under his breath, his voice carrying across the wind. Daniel stood, wiping the dust from his hands. You know her? He asked. Marin gave a bitter laugh. Everyone knows her kind, he said, spitting into the dirt. She is an exile, a traitor among her own people. They say she betrayed her clan, and because of that, she was cast out to die alone. Daniel's chest tightened. His eyes flicked toward the girl. She did not deny it, did not argue. Her face was like stone, her silence unbroken. Marin shook his head, his tone sharp. You should stay away from her, human. Her curse will fall on anyone who stands at her side. With that, he turned and left, leaving only dust behind. Daniel looked at her, searching for answers, but she did not meet his gaze. She turned back to the wall, lifting another stone. Her movements were sharp now, almost angry. Daniel felt torn inside. Was it true? Was she truly a traitor, or was she only guilty of being different, of refusing to bow her head? That night, Daniel lay awake in his hut. He thought of his wife, of the family he had lost. He thought of the girl's silent eyes, the fire that never went out, even when beaten down. And he thought of Marin's words. But instead of fear, Daniel felt something else. Recognition. He too had been cast aside by life, abandoned to loneliness. And if she was truly an exile, then maybe they were the same. Two broken souls building something the world tried to destroy. The next day, Daniel returned to the site earlier than usual. The girl was already there, her hands raw, her shoulders trembling. She worked as if she wanted to bury her pain in every brick. Daniel stepped forward and without hesitation picked up a stone. She looked at him then, her eyes sharp, questioning. Daniel said softly, I do not care what they call you. I see who you are. Her eyes widened slightly, the first crack in her wall of silence. For a moment, Daniel thought she might speak, but instead she turned back to the wall. Still, her hands shook less after that, but danger never stayed far. That night, when the moon rose silver and cold, Daniel saw movement again on the horizon. Not one lantern this time, but many. The enforcers had returned, and now they were more. Their voices carried across the empty land, harsh and cruel. The girl stood tall, her back straight, waiting. Daniel's heart pounded, fear clawing at him. He wanted to bury her pain in every brick. Daniel stepped forward and without hesitation picked up a stone. She looked at him then, her eyes sharp, questioning. Daniel said softly, I do not care what they call you. I see who you are. Her eyes widened slightly, the first crack in her wall of silence. For a moment, Daniel thought she might speak, but instead she turned back to the wall. Still, her hands shook less after that, but danger never stayed far. That night, when the moon rose silver and cold, Daniel saw movement again on the horizon. Not one lantern this time, but many. The enforcers had returned, and now they were more. Their voices carried across the empty land, harsh and cruel. The girl stood tall, her back straight, waiting. Daniel's heart pounded, fear clawing at him. He wanted to run, but his feet refused. He knew if they came for her again, he could not remain hidden this time. The enforcers stopped before the wall, their leader stepping forward. His eyes glowed faintly, his voice low and venomous. You were told to leave this place, exile. You were told you have no right to build, no right to live among walls. The girl's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. The leader sneered, then raised his weapon high. Daniel could not hold back anymore. He stepped out of the shadows, his voice loud. Stop! The enforcers turned, their faces full of surprise. A lone human standing in front of them, his hands empty but his eyes burning. The leader's lips curled into a cruel smile. And what is this? A human defending an outcast? Do you know who she is? What she has done? Daniel did not waver, his voice firm. I know she is building something brick by brick, and that is more than any of you will ever do. The enforcers laughed, the sound echoing in the night. But Daniel's words had struck something deeper than he realized. The girl's eyes widened, a flicker of light shining within them. For the first time since they met, she spoke, her voice quiet but strong. I am not a traitor, she said, her words trembling in the air. I was punished for telling the truth. The silence that followed was heavy as stone. Daniel turned to her, stunned by her voice, but before he could speak, the enforcer snarled and lifted his weapon higher. The night trembled with the promise of violence, and Daniel knew the time of watching from the shadows was over. The battle for her home and perhaps for his own soul was about to begin. The night was thick with tension, the stars hidden behind dark clouds. Daniel stood between the alien girl and the enforcers, his body trembling but his spirit unshaken. He had never felt so small, yet never so alive. The leader of the enforcers raised his weapon, its jagged edge glowing faintly with alien energy. "Step aside, human," the leader snarled. "This exile has no right to build, no right to breathe." Daniel's voice shook, but his words were firm. "If she has no right, then neither do I. But here we are building something better than hate." The enforcers laughed, their voices sharp as blades. One of them kicked over a section of the half-built wall, stones crashing to the ground. The girl flinched, her hands clenched into fists, her eyes blazing with fury. But she did not move. She did not strike back. She only stood tall, her silence stronger than their shouting. Daniel's heart pounded. He knew he could not fight them with weapons, but he could fight them with courage. He stepped forward, placing himself directly in front of the wall. "If you want to destroy her work," he said, "you will have to destroy me too." The leader tilted his head, studying him with cold amusement. "A human risking his life for an exile," he sneered. "How pathetic." But Daniel did not flinch. His eyes burned with something he thought he had lost long ago. "Hope." The girl suddenly stepped beside him, her voice low but unyielding. "They fear what is built," she said, her words heavy with meaning. "Because once a home stands, it cannot be erased. Once a dream rises, it cannot be killed." Her first words in his presence struck Daniel like thunder. For the first time he understood. She was not just building a house, she was defying her fate brick by brick. The enforcers hissed, anger flashing across their faces. The leader raised his weapon high, but before he could strike, a strange sound filled the air. The ground beneath them trembled, faint but growing. The enforcers paused, their eyes darting toward the horizon. In the distance, faint lights flickered. Torches, lanterns, maybe even machines. Someone or something was coming. Daniel's breath caught, fear and hope tangled in his chest. The leader snarled, lowering his weapon. "This is not finished," he spat. "You cannot protect her forever." With a sharp gesture, the enforcers retreated into the night, vanishing like shadows swallowed by the dark. When silence returned, Daniel turned to the girl. Her eyes met his, fierce and glowing with unspoken gratitude. "You spoke," he whispered, his voice rough. She nodded slowly, then placed a hand against the wall they had defended. Her touch was steady, her eyes determined. "This will not fall," she said, her words trembling yet strong. Daniel felt a fire light inside him. For so long he had lived only with grief, but standing beside her, he felt something new. A purpose. He placed his own hand against the wall, the rough stone cool beneath his palm. "Then we build," he said, and so they did, through the night and into the next day. Daniel worked with a strength he did not know he had. The girl moved like a force of nature, her silence broken only by brief words of direction. Together, they raised the walls higher, thicker, stronger. The house began to take shape, not just as shelter but as a fortress of defiance. But deep inside, Daniel knew the enforcers would return. They would not let this stand, and next time they would not come with only threats. They would come with destruction. He also knew he could not fight them alone. If the colony turned against them, if the enforcers gathered more strength, then both he and the girl would be swept away. That night, Daniel sat outside his hut, staring at the half-built house glowing faintly under the starlight. He thought of his wife, of the family he once dreamed of. He thought of the girl beside him, her fire burning against all odds, and he made a silent vow. No matter what came, he would not abandon her. She had been punished for telling the truth, and he had been punished by life itself. Together, they had nothing left to lose. And sometimes, that made people unstoppable. Far away in the shadows of the hills, unseen eyes watched. The enforcers were gathering, and this time they would not leave the house standing. The days after the confrontation passed like a storm brewing on the horizon. Daniel and the alien girl worked harder than ever, their hands raw, their backs aching, but neither willing to stop. Every brick they laid felt like a challenge to fate, every stone a message to those who wished them gone. The house was no longer just walls. It was a shield, a promise, a defiance against the voices that told them they had no right to build. But in the silence of night, Daniel felt unease creep into his bones. He knew the enforcers would return, and next time they would not come with warnings. They would come with fury, and yet the thought did not break him. It made him stronger. Because now, he was not only protecting the house, he was protecting her, and the dream she carried. On the fifth night, his fear became truth. The sound of heavy steps shook the ground, the glow of alien weapons lit the darkness. Daniel's breath grew shallow as he saw them, twice as many as Baal. Before, their leader at the front, his weapon burning with cruel light. Behind him, others carried strange tools, sharp and heavy, meant not only to destroy walls but to crush anyone who dared stand in the way. The girl stood tall, her eyes fixed on them. Daniel moved to her side without hesitation, his hands empty, his body small compared to their armored figures, but his heart beat with a strength he had forgotten long ago. Together, they faced the storm. The leader's voice was cold as stone. "This is your final warning, exile," he hissed. "You were cast out, you have no clan, no home, no right, and this human who stands beside you will fall with you." Daniel stepped forward, his voice steady. "Then we fall together," he said. His words echoed in the night like a blade cutting through silence. The enforcers laughed, their cruel voices rising. One of them raised a weapon to strike, but before the blow fell, the alien girl stepped forward, her own voice ringing out like thunder. "I was cast out because I told the truth," she shouted. "I saw corruption in the council. I spoke, and they silenced me. They cut me away from my people, but they could not cut away my will." Her words stunned Daniel, his heart aching with both pride and rage. The enforcers sneered, but he saw their unease. She was not the weak exile they painted her to be. She was dangerous because she carried truth, and truth was harder to kill than any wall. The leader snarled and gave the order, "Destroy it all." The enforcers surged forward, weapons raised. Daniel's body screamed with fear, but he did not move. He picked up a broken piece of stone from the ground and held it like a weapon. The girl bent low, her hand glowing faintly with strange energy she had hidden until now. For the first time, Daniel realized she was not powerless. She had only been holding back. The clash came fast and brutal. One enforcer swung at the wall, but the girl moved like lightning, blocking the strike with her glowing hand, the weapon sparking as if struck. By fire, Daniel charged another, slamming the stone into the armored figure with all the strength his body still carried. Pain shot through him, but he did not fall. The enforcers stumbled back, shocked by the ferocity of a human they had thought weak. Together they fought, not with equal power but with equal will. The girl's hidden strength flared, each strike she made carrying the weight of defiance. Daniel's courage burned, each desperate move a reminder that he had nothing left to lose. For every stone they defended, for every wall they held, they became more than just two broken souls. They became a shield against the storm. But the enemy was strong, too strong. The leader stepped forward, his weapon glowing brighter, his voice filled with venom. "You cannot win, no matter how hard you fight." Daniel staggered, his chest burning, but he lifted his head. "Maybe not," he gasped, "but you cannot erase what is already built. You cannot erase hope." The girl's eyes flashed, her voice rising with power. "Then we stand together," she declared, her words shaking the night. Her hands slammed against the ground, a surge of alien energy bursting outward, knocking back the nearest enforcers. Daniel shielded his face from the light, but when he looked again, he saw fear flicker in the enemy's eyes. For the first time, the enforcers realized this was not only about tearing down walls, this was about fighting against souls that refused to break. The battle raged, stones breaking, dust flying, shouts echoing across the land. And in the heart of it all, a lonely human and an exiled alien girl stood side by side, their bodies bloodied, their strength fading, but their will unshaken. Together, they were no longer outcasts. Together, they were something more. Builders of a new story, defenders of a new family. The night ended without victory, but also without defeat. The enforcers pulled back, retreating into the shadows once more, their leader's eyes filled with rage. "This is not the end," he promised, before vanishing into the darkness. Daniel collapsed to his knees, exhausted, his body trembling. The girl knelt beside him, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder, and for the first time since his wife's death, Daniel did not feel alone. The battle had ended, but the echoes of war still trembled in the air. Broken stones lay scattered across the ground, dust still clung to Daniel's skin, and the alien girl's glowing hands flickered faintly, drained of strength. Yet when dawn came, neither of them gave in to despair. Instead, they stood before the half-shattered walls and began again. Brick by brick, stone by stone, they rebuilt. Every fallen piece was lifted, every crack was filled. It was not just a house anymore, it was a fortress of memory, a promise to the universe that they would not break. Daniel's hands bled as he worked, but he did not stop. The girl's body shook with fatigue, but her eyes never wavered. Together, they shaped something stronger than walls. They shaped hope itself. The colony watched from afar, whispers spreading like fire. Some called Daniel a fool for siding with an exile. Others whispered of courage, of a human who dared to defy enforcers with nothing but stone in his hand and fire in his heart. The people began to wonder, if a human and an exile could stand together, what else might be possible? But in the shadows the enforcers prepared. The leader had tasted shame, and he would not allow it again. He gathered more warriors, more weapons, and something darker, machines that could reduce walls to dust in moments. This time they did not plan only to destroy a house. They planned to erase both the exile and the human who dared to defend her. As the days passed, Daniel and the girl grew closer. Though her words were few, her presence spoke louder than any language. She began to teach him simple gestures of her people, signs that carried meaning deeper than words. A hand pressing said to the wall meant trust. A hand pressed to the chest meant truth. And one night, as they worked beneath the stars, she pressed her hand to his shoulder. It was the gesture for bond. Daniel's throat tightened. He had thought he had no more family, no more love. Yet here was this alien girl, once a stranger, now the only soul who made him feel alive again. His loneliness faded, replaced by something he thought he would never know again. He whispered softly, "We are family now." And though she did not answer with words, her glowing eyes told him she understood, but peace could not last. On the seventh night, the ground trembled with a force unlike before. From the horizon came shadows larger than men, machines shaped like beasts of metal, their legs pounding against the earth, their weapons glowing with unholy fire. Behind them marched the enforcers, more than ever before, their leader's face twisted with vengeance. "This is the end," his voice roared across the night. "Your walls will fall, your hope will turn to dust, and no memory of you will remain." Daniel's heart raced, fear clawing at him. The girl stood tall, but he could see the weight pressing down on her shoulders. The machines were too strong, their weapons too great. For the first time, Daniel wondered if they could not win. But then he looked at the house, its walls standing proud despite every blow. He remembered the long nights of silence, the days of pain, the strength they had found in each other. He knew then, this was not only a fight for survival, it was a fight for the right to exist, for the right to dream, for the right to call something home. Daniel turned to her, his voice steady despite the fear. "If this is the end, then we face it together." The girl's glowing eyes burned brighter, and she nodded. "No," she whispered. "This is the beginning." As the machines closed in, Daniel lifted, a heavy stone in his hand. The alien girl's palms flared with light, brighter than ever before. Side by side, they stood before the walls they had built. Not just a man and an exile, not just builders of stone, but defenders of hope, guardians of a dream. The storm was about to break, but they were ready. The ground shook like thunder. The air burned with the heat of alien weapons. The machines of the enforcers marched forward, their glowing cores humming with deadly power. Behind them, the enforcer army advanced, their leader at the front, his cruel eyes fixed on the half-built house. "This ends tonight," he roared, his voice echoing across the barren land. Daniel stood before the walls, his chest rising and falling with sharp breaths. He had no armor, no weapon but stone, yet his resolve was unbreakable. Beside him, the alien girl's hands glowed brighter than ever before, her entire body trembling as energy gathered within her. She was no longer silent, no longer hidden. She was ready to unleash the truth she had carried in her soul. The machines opened fire, beams of searing light striking the walls. Stone cracked, dust exploded, but the house did not fall. Every brick they had laid together seemed to resist, as if it carried not just weight but will. Daniel rushed to fill the gaps, dragging stones into place even as fire rained around him. The girl raised her arms, her glowing hands forming a shield of light that shimmered over the walls. The energy shook her body, blood streaked her skin, but she refused to break. The enforcer leader stepped forward, slamming his weapon into the ground. A wave of destructive energy shot forward, tearing across the land. The shield flickered, the walls cracked deeper. Daniel staggered back, his legs weak, but when he saw her fall to one knee, he roared with fury. "No," he shouted, "we will not fall." He picked up the largest stone he could lift and hurled it with all his strength. The rock struck an enforcer square in the chest, knocking him back in shock. The army hesitated. Stew. And that a human would dare to fight them with his bare hands. The girl rose again, her glowing eyes blazing. Her voice rang out like a bell. "You call me traitor because I spoke the truth," she cried. But truth cannot be killed, and neither can hope. Her body erupted with light, a surge of energy blasting outward, shattering the nearest machines, throwing enforcers into the dust. Daniel shielded his eyes, the brilliance blinding. When he looked again, he saw the enemy faltering, fear finally breaking through their arrogance. The leader screamed in rage, charging forward, his weapon glowing with deadly fire. Daniel stepped in his path, his body shaking but his spirit stronger than steel. The leader raised the weapon high, ready to strike him down, but before the blow landed, the girl's hand shot out, glowing brighter than a star. She caught the weapon in her grasp, energy sparking wildly. Her voice shook the night. "You will not take this from me." The weapon shattered in her hands, exploding in a storm of light. The enforcer leader was thrown back, his armor cracked, his face twisted in disbelief. His army staggered, their confidence broken, their formation collapsing. Daniel stumbled toward her, his chest heaving. "You did it," he whispered. But she shook her head. "No," she said softly. "We did it." The enforcers fled into the darkness, their broken leader crawling away, his vow of vengeance lost in the dust. The night fell silent at last, broken only by the crackling ruins of shattered machines. Daniel collapsed to his knees, exhausted, blood on his hands, tears in his eyes. The girl knelt beside him, her glowing hand resting gently on his shoulder. Her eyes, once filled with loneliness, now carried something new, belonging. They turned to look at the house, battered, cracked, but still standing. It was no longer just a shelter of stone. It was a symbol, a fortress of truth and courage, a home built from pain and hope. Daniel's voice trembled. "This house, it is not only yours, it is ours." The girl nodded, placing her hand on the wall, then on her chest, then gently on his heart. It was the sign for bond, for family. For the first time in years, Daniel smiled. The loneliness that once consumed him was gone, replaced by the warmth of something greater. He had lost a wife, he had lost his old life, but in the dust of exile and the fire of battle, he had found something new, a family reborn, brick by brick. As dawn broke, the first light of morning spilled over the horizon. The house stood tall against the ruins, a beacon to all who looked upon it, and in its shadow stood a lonely human and an alien girl, no longer broken, no longer alone. Together, they had built not only walls, but hope. Together, they had built the beginning of a new story.